Okay, 16, part 7. Sorry for the abrupt end of the last one. This was supposed to be attached to the last one, but ran out of time, so had to kind of go back, chop it, and just tack this one on at the end. This will definitely be the last video for this lecture series. So let's get on with it, shall we? We need to talk about the election of 1960, okay, which would end the decade of the 50s. So the 50s, we think of the 50s as being 50 to 59, but really the 0 is, you count from 1 to 10, right? Not 0 to 9. So the 60s actually end the 50s, but we would call it the 60s. It's just easier that way. Anyway, the point is this is going to end the decade. And we got a presidential election year, okay? So our Republican candidate is Richard M. Nixon. He is the vice president. He's been the vice president for Eisenhower for these 8 years, so he's had national visibility. Right? Eisenhower has been a fairly popular president. You look at his re-election in '56. And this often happens. A president who's been fairly popular, a lot of times their vice president will run on the, hey, I'll be like the third term. I'd be Eisenhower's third term. I already know all of his advisors. We have our programs in place. It'd be an easy transition to a new administration, and later you might make a few changes. So vice presidents of popular presidents often try to run for the White House. Now sometimes this works. It works for Martin Van Buren when he succeeded Andrew Jackson. It worked for George Herbert Walker Bush when he succeeded Reagan. Didn't work for Al Gore when he tried to, Vice President Gore did not succeed. Didn't follow up Bill Clinton. So anyway, Nixon's going to run to be president in '60. I'm sure there probably were some other Republicans running against him, but Nixon gets the nomination. The Democrats, I don't know who all was running, but the person who gets the nomination is the senator from Massachusetts, John F. Kennedy. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, often abbreviated JFK. Right? So Nixon, former congressman from California, vice president for 8 years, and then John F. Kennedy, one of the senators from Massachusetts. Now, one of the big features of the 1960 election is they decide to have some televised debates. There's this new television thing. Almost everybody has one now. They decide to do some debates. Now, there had been some televised debates a little bit earlier. I think there might have been a few things in 56, 58. Nothing between Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson, as far as I recall, but maybe some governors here or there. But this is getting into presidential politics now, okay? Because now almost everybody's got at least one TV in the house. And this is one of the big things people always talk about from the 1960 election. So we'll talk about it for a minute. Okay? More than a minute. Okay? So here's Nixon Kennedy shaking hands. Nixon smiling. They're at least pretending they like each other. Maybe they actually are friendly. Okay? Maybe it was a simpler time in politics. Nowadays, politics is really ugly. People insult each other and say that the other guys are idiots and blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's been going on back since John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. It's nothing new, but it kind of goes in, ups and downs. So here's Nixon shaking John Kennedy's hand. Maybe he really was happy to see him. Okay? Or maybe he's just playing nice for the cameras. But, you put on the smile, pretend, at least. Hey, Jack, good to see you. I'm going to kick your butt in the election, but nice hair. Good-looking suit there. It doesn't cost you anything to be civil. For crying out loud, could we have a little bit more civility in politics, please? Anyway, these guys are going to have a debate. All right? I got some more pictures here, I think. There's Kennedy speaking. There's Kennedy speaking. All right. Pictures of debates. I'm thinking that top one might be kind of like a manufactured photo. Normally, you can't take photos of things on TV screens because the scan rate is really weird back then, and if you try to take a film shot of it, it usually doesn't work. So I wouldn't be surprised if somebody created that photo. But anyway, let's get to the debates. That's the important thing. We're going to do, if I recall, 4 of these things. Okay. Uno, dos, tres, cuatro. All right. If I recall was the number. And their focus, maybe one's on foreign affairs, maybe one's on domestic, so they've actually got some agendas of what they're going to talk about. Okay. And these were honest to goodness debates with substance. Okay. Not like this dog and pony show we have nowadays. All right, so I'm going to get my soapbox here for a minute. The debates we have nowadays are just a joke. All right, they get 18 people on stage, or 10 people on stage, or however many things, and then the press comes up with these questions, and then they don't necessarily ask the same question of each candidate all the time, so you can't necessarily compare. They ask Beto O'Rourke one question, and then they turn around and ask Bernie Sanders a completely different question, so you can't even compare and contrast, where they stand. And then they don't ask Tulsi Gabbard anything. It's just like, oh, well, she's not a serious candidate. So the press is picking the winners and losers already and asking questions. It's really just a joint press conference. And then the questions themselves often are lame. I read that after one of the recent Democratic debates, so now I didn't watch it because I don't watch these things, Democrat or Republicans. I'd rather beat my head against the wall. But someone supposedly said that supposedly one of the Democratic debates they didn't ask any questions about like foreign affairs. It was all domestic stuff, right? Which would be fine if that was like next week we'll have the foreign affairs debate, but they don't. And then the questions are sometimes just ludicrous. Mrs. Clinton, how would you guarantee world peace? You have 30 seconds. They're jokes. But these were real substantial debates, kind of like the Lincoln-Douglas debate. You ask Kennedy something, then you give Nixon a chance to respond, and it's a much higher level. Okay. Now, apparently, I'm not an expert on these. Like in this one here, you'll notice Nixon's in Los Angeles and Kennedy's in New York, so they weren't even necessarily in the same place. Although there were, like I said, 4 of these, so maybe in some of them. Maybe they were in the same studio at the same time for some of these debates. Okay? It's not really important. Now here's the deal. Nixon apparently was actually a pretty good debater. I understand he was on the debate team in school, so he kind of knew how to do it. He'd studied he'd been vice president for 8 years, so he knew a lot of the stuff. He studied the material. He had answers. He was ready to go. Okay. Now, I'm not saying Kennedy wasn't ready to go. I'm sure he's gone to a good school. I'm sure he knows this stuff too. But here's the deal. Nixon apparently had injured himself and had been off the campaign trail for a while, recuperating, so his tan had faded. He was a bit pale. And then he goes into the studio on at least one of these, and they're going to make him up. Now, this is 1960. It's very primitive television. If any of you here have been in the drama department on stage plays or stuff, you know that the bright lights they use on stage wash out your facial features. And so they make you up, overly made up, to where when the lights wash it out, you still have facial features. Okay, but then you see those actors off stage, and it's like, wow, they look like clowns. Okay, so it's part of the mystique of theater. Okay. So they're like telling Nixon, well, Mr. Vice President, we need to make you up. And he's going, oh, makeup, that's for girls. So he's not letting him do a real good, heavy makeup job. Nixon's also one of these people who has like a real heavy beard, so he grows in, by 5 o'clock shadow. Okay. So here's the deal. All right. Now, this is always said about these debates. It is said so much that people now don't even go back and check the facts. They just, well, so-and-so said it, so it must be true. So for the love of God, I hope whoever originally came up with this actually did the research and validated all this, because now everybody just repeats it. Okay? Here's what they say. Oh, by the way, I'm going to mention this. John F. Kennedy is Catholic. We haven't had a Catholic president before. This caused Al Smith some trouble back in 28, maybe. But Nixon, to his credit, doesn't bring this up. Doesn't try to make it a campaign issue. Now we don't think anything of it. But John Kennedy was, a Catholic running what had traditionally been a more Protestant-oriented country. Anyway, they did polls after the debates. They did surveys. Okay. Now, obviously, if you're a staunch Republican, you're going to think Nixon won. If you're a staunch Democrat, you're going to think Kennedy won. But there's those undecided people in the middle, the independents, people who haven't made up their mind. Those are people you poll afterwards. Here's what they always say. The people who heard the debate on the radio, a lot of them thought Nixon had won. He knew the answers, he knew the material, he answered the questions, well. And so people listening on the radio, they tell us, most of them thought, or majority of them thought, that Nixon came off better. But people watching on TV, apparently what they saw was a sweaty Nixon who was looking uncomfortable under the cameras, okay? But the John Kennedy was poised and collected, and that he looked presidential. Now, I'm not saying Kennedy didn't answer his questions well either. I didn't actually see these debates because I was like 2 months old. But, Kennedy looked good on TV. All right? Nixon sounded good on the radio. Now, here's where some people say that the presidential election process started to go to hell. Because then it starts morphing. That people are more interested in what they see than what they hear. All right? Did so-and-so look good? Did he look presidential? Was he poised? Oh, which is kind of important. He's someone who remains calm and poised. But what happens then, it starts morphing from these substantial debates to where nowadays the 30-second sound bite. It's going to be on TV news at 6 o'clock, and it has to fit in. So everybody's trying to talk in little blurbs that can be cut and edited. So for better or worse, TV changes the way the presidential campaigns go. Okay? All right. This thing was a squeaker. Got your election map here. Let's look at it. All right. Kennedy is in blue. Nixon is in... I'm sorry. Nixon's in blue. Kennedy's in red because it's backwards. The problem is my smiling face is covering up the color code. Yeah. So Nixon is blue in this. Kennedy is in red. All right. But don't worry so much about that. Look at the electoral vote. Kennedy is a substantial winner, like 56 to 40. Okay. But look at the popular vote. 49.7 to 49.6. The difference is about 120,000 votes. This is like one of the closest elections ever. In fact, I think it is the closest election ever without checking notes. Right? Now look at 34,227,000 versus 34,107,000. So yes, your vote does matter. Somebody supposedly calculated that if one more person per precinct in some certain state that was like a swing state had voted for Nixon, that he would have been president. Okay? It was that close. Okay? So yes, votes sometimes can be critical. So Kennedy's going to get to be your president as we go into the 1960s. Okay, I've got a picture here of his inauguration. Okay, here's the Chief Justice. Kennedy's on the right. Looks like Lyndon Johnson behind him, the Vice President, outgoing Eisenhower on the other side. Anyway, Kennedy talks about how the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans, because he's quite young by presidential standards. Okay? He's about the same age as Theodore Roosevelt when Roosevelt became president. But remember, Roosevelt wasn't elected at first. Kennedy, I could look at my notes. He's like 43, 44. He's just a kid by presidential standards. Okay, and so we're going to go into the 1960s with a new president, which also means a new lecture, which means a new set of videos, which we'll work on here. I'll probably work on them tomorrow, but they'll all appear to you magically at the same time. All right, so I got to wrap this thing up. Coming up on the time limit. Hope you enjoyed the lecture, and remember, study, study, study.